Detach from false guilt. One of the things that is commonly experienced from people, by people in difficult relationships is false guilt. Guilt means you've done something wrong. False guilt means you feel guilty when you have not done something wrong. This is very common with people who are in difficult relationships where the other person is not taking any responsibility for themselves. So let me give you some wrong beliefs that false guilt stems from. 1, you are responsible for the other person's happiness or unhappiness. You are not responsible for anyone else's happiness or unhappiness. That is an inside job. That is that person's responsibility. You cannot control that. 2, that you are wrong and it's your fault and your responsibility for the fact that the other person is feeling bad because they're experiencing the consequences of their own choices, okay? So in other words, if you think I've got to bail this person out of their wrong, of the consequences of their choices, because if I don't and that person feels bad, it's my fault. That's a wrong belief. That's a misbelief. 3, you're responsible for the other person's feelings when you set a boundary. Okay, you cannot set a boundary and take care of the other person's feelings, because taking care of a boundary is taking care of yourself. The other person has to manage his or her own feelings when you set your boundary. That's not your job. Your job is to set your own boundary for you to be responsible and accountable. And then the 4th one is the belief that you're selfish when you put yourself first. So if you're operating under that, I hope you're not, but if you are, you got to get rid of that belief that you're selfish when you put yourself first. You're not selfish when you put yourself first. There are many times in life when you absolutely must put yourself first, and it is required and essential, and not automatically selfish, wrong, feel guilty when you put yourself first. But there's a lot of people that anytime they put themselves first, they're feeling guilty that they've done something wrong because they're selfish. Probably comes from an old message in childhood that said, don't be selfish, don't put yourself first, don't ask for what you want, just stay over there, be quiet, don't be selfish, okay? That's one of the dysfunctional family rules. Okay, let me give you a personal example of how this worked in my own life and how you can be freed from false guilt, okay? By looking at these misbeliefs and dealing with what's going on inside of you. My mother-in-law, who's now passed away, had a disabled daughter who was 100% dependent on her, and she took care of her all the way through till my mother-in-law was, I believe, 75 years old when she got cancer and then could no longer care for her. My mother-in-law did this. It was hard for her, hard on her, obviously, as it would be. But I was very codependent. I grew up in a home where my mother was dealing with my dad, who was an abusive, violent, physically and emotionally abusive alcoholic to my mother. And I grew up believing that it was my responsibility to take care of my mother. And that's what I did. I intervened. I tried to take care of her. I helped her clean up the mess. I protected her. I covered her. I did all those things. And in my head, it was my responsibility as a little child, starting at age 3, to care for my mother. And so I naturally took this false guilt or this excessive guilt into my adult relationships. My mother-in-law was also in an abusive marriage and he ended up leaving her at some point with the daughter, with her solely responsible for the daughter. So she was kind of the same kind of victim, like not able to care for herself as my mother was. So that naturally triggered all of those feelings inside of me, and naturally triggered that feeling of responsibility, that feeling that I'm responsible for making her happy, for taking care of her. So my mother-in-law commonly would say, I'm lonely, I'm bored, I don't have anything to do, no one comes sees me. She did go to church, but she had kind of a limited life. And anytime she would say that, I would feel guilty. And then because I felt guilty and I didn't like it, then I would be angry with her and uncomfortable and not want to talk to her or avoid a conversation with her. And I resented her. And I resented her when she said she was lonely or said she was unhappy or said when we went on a trip, I never get to go there or I don't get to go anywhere, because it triggered guilt in me. And as soon as it was said, I felt like, okay, then I have to take care of her, or I have to take her with me, or I have to make her happy, or I've got to be the one that brings things into her life so she's not lonely, or I need to go over there all the time. And that was my own stuff. So I would tell her why she shouldn't be lonely, tell her what she could do, tell her when she lived in a mobile home park and she could go to the card games and the lunches and she could get a caregiver and all these things that she didn't want to do. That's not how she lived her life. She wasn't ready for that. She wasn't comfortable. That wasn't the choices she made. Now, it took me, I have to say, about 20 years. That's a really long time, but that's how long it took for me to literally grow up. I was 20 when I got married, so I had a lot of learning to do in those first 10 years, a lot of growing up actually to do. But when I let go of the fact, when I accepted that I wasn't responsible for her happiness or unhappiness, I wasn't responsible for her feelings, I wasn't responsible for the choices that she made, and that if she didn't choose to go to those lunches and get involved in the mobile home park, that I didn't have to fill up her life because it didn't have enough in it. And that I wasn't selfish when I spent time to take care of my own pursuits and my own needs and my own family, or to go on a vacation alone with my husband and my kids. When I could embrace all of that and say that my guilt was my fault and not hers, okay? That she wasn't making me feel guilty, that I was feeling guilty when she was simply expressing how she felt and what was going on in her life. She was telling me that she was lonely. I should have been able to hear that and say, I know, that's sad that you're lonely, and validate her and be empathetic about her loneliness and about her struggles and that her, situation in life, and that things had not turned out like she wanted and that she was disappointed and those types of things. I couldn't validate her and listen to those things with a caring heart until I was able to get rid of my own false guilt. When I could get rid of my own false guilt, I accepted that she didn't have to be who I was and handle her situation like I would. I would get involved in the lunches and in the games and in all that stuff to the best that I could while I still took care of my daughter. I would figure out ways to get out. I would figure out ways to get a bigger life, because that's me, all right? That's who I am, but that's not who she was. And it wasn't fair for me to expect her to be that way and to lecture her about how she should be when that wasn't who she was. I should simply have validated her. But the other thing that happened that was nice as a result of this is when I got rid of those 4 wrong beliefs, I was able to be around her and not resent her, and be around her and not dislike her and not feel uncomfortable. And I was even able to take her more places and invite her more, because I did it because I wanted to, and I did it without feeling that I had to, and I did it without feeling guilty. So that was a really cool outcome of that, because I could actually care for her and bring some good into her life, that in those areas where she was complaining, without feeling so obligated that I couldn't do it at all. Because before, if I did it at all, I felt like I had to do it completely, and that would have smothered me and been way too much. So that was a really awesome outcome of that blessed her and that blessed me and my husband and my kids to have their, it's not like I didn't have her in our life. She was always in our life. But I'm saying to be able to invite her to be a part of things and go places with us, and, even take her on some trips. that was something that I had a hard time doing before when I felt all that false guilt. So I hope this makes sense to you. There's an interesting verse in 1 John 3:19 through 20. It says, "This is how we know that we belong to the truth and how we set our hearts at rest in his presence. If our hearts condemn us, we know that God is greater than our hearts and he knows everything." Dear friends, if our hearts do not condemn us, we have confidence in God. So sometimes our hearts can condemn us and we can be right. Sometimes they can condemn us and that's not right. God knows our truly what's going on and our motives and all of those things. If you're struggling with false guilt, my heart goes out to you because I know how just really difficult that was for me to carry all of that false guilt. And I could go through how I carried it in my marriage and how I carried it with my children and the choices that they make and how I carry it when people have relationship problems and struggles. But false guilt means you haven't done anything wrong, but you still feel guilty. So I hope that this encourages you to begin to look at that. Do you have those beliefs that you are responsible for another person's happiness or unhappiness? That you're responsible for another person's distress when they're experiencing the consequences of their actions? You're responsible for another person's feelings when you set a boundary, or that you're selfish when you put yourself first? So thank you for watching this video on Change My Relationship. Thank you.